self-defense, castle doctrine, imminent threat, duty to retreat. All words and phrases that have deep and profound meanings, but sometimes I don't think people in this space fully grasp what those meanings are and how these things dovetail together. We're going to have our guest today, Andrew Branca, help shed some light on these things. As well, we are going to dig into some current cases pertaining to self-defense and look at how we can keep ourselves out of hot water in a fight that hopefully none of us ever have to get in. Let's dig right in with self-defense expert Andrew Branca. Welcome to another episode of the Carry Trainer Higher Line podcast. Hey all, welcome to yet another episode of the Carry Trainer Higher Line podcast. As we told you in the intro, we've got the preeminent self-defense attorney himself, Mr. Andrew Branca, and we're going to talk about all kinds of self-defense stuff related to legally, lawfully armed citizens, as well as maybe some other stuff. And so welcome, Mr. Branca. How are you today?
I'm doing awesome, man. How are you?
I feel very underdressed. I need one of those fake shirt fronts with the tie, you know, the t-shirt with the tie on it. I could just grab and throw it on like the Dickie.
But in fairness, you're probably wearing pants.
Wearing
pants.
It's funny you say that because I'm not. I'm just kidding. You got no pants on? You just got a suit top on?
No. I have pants on.
It'd be a lot cooler if you didn't. Are you at all ever concerned about those jokes affecting your credibility as an attorney?
No.
Nobody can impugn your character based on pants.
Listen, my whole career is speaking legal truth that drives people absolutely insane and makes them hate me. I get nothing but hate all day long for my legal opinions on cases.
That's interesting because that's a good segue into what I wanted to talk about. What things do you say that people hate?
Well, what tends to happen is people will see some kind of use of force event and they'll have an immediate, visceral, emotional reaction to it, which is normal. That doesn't make them bad people. That makes them normal people. People are emotional creatures. We have this facade of reason and rationality that we are conditioned by society to try apply to the world, but really fundamentally we're emotional creatures. So they develop this emotional reaction to a case, and then I step in and I say, well, let me play the role of the attorney Spock here and actually do the legal analysis. Take the facts as we know them, apply the relevant law to those facts, and we arrive at a legal conclusion that may be contrary to people's emotional take. But once people have emotionally committed to a position, it's almost impossible. You can't reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into in the first place. And they don't like the correct legal answer if it conflicts with their emotional take on the case, and they just lose their mind. Now, some people can say, oh yeah, I never thought about it that way, and adjust their opinion. That's about, in my experience, about 5 to 10% of people.
I was going to say, what's that, 1%? It seems very similar to like when we buy something and then somebody tells us like, dude, you bought a Chevy? Chevy's totally junk, and let me tell you why. And like, it seems like that emotional thing. Well, my dad always drove Chevys and they got the cool commercial like a rock, and the truck's driving through the field and it makes me feel good. Like, F you, even if you tell them that, and I don't care what you drive, but it seems like a similar kind of a thought process. I've had these conversations with people. I just had one with my dear mother, not so much on self-defense, but about something legal. And the argument went to, well, that law is stupid. Okay, well, someone's like, all right, I get that. I might agree with you on that, but then you have to say, what's the law? How do we change the law, right?
So from my perspective, it's as if, imagine there was an item that people valued, but it was only worthwhile having if you had 5 of them. Really important to have 5 of them. So people see some use of force event and they go, oh yeah, that's 5 of those things. That's cool. I'm really happy where I am. And then I step in and I say, well, wait a minute. I see 2 over here and 2 over there. And that's it. And 2 plus 2 is 4. It's not 5. And right. They just don't like that answer. And they will emote. And by the way, I don't mean just Again, these aren't bad people. I lecture at the FBI Academy at Quantico sometimes. I'm in an auditorium with 300 FBI agents, senior law enforcement from around the country. They have the same emotional reaction. If they've emotionally committed to some take on a use of force event, I can show them incontrovertible evidence that their take is mistaken. That whatever was said was not in the 911 call, for example. It just didn't happen. And they cannot readjust their position. You can see it on their faces. Their face just turns to stone. It's a remarkable human characteristic, but it's one of the reasons, frankly, we have criminal trials where we have all these filters on evidence and filters on argument, and we tell the jury you're only allowed to arrive at a conclusion based on the application of reason to the facts and the law, not anything you heard outside, not based on bias or prejudice, or we try to strip out all those normal human emotional takes on these situations in order to arrive at a reasoned verdict at the end is the ideal trial, of course.
It's kind of like, I shouldn't say kind of like, it is, it's science with human interaction. Like, take all the evidence, and if like 12 random people all listen to it, would they continually arrive at the same conclusion? But the hard part is getting them to take the emotion out of it.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get it? That seems, which is probably part of the job of the people picking the jury. When you're that specialist, you probably want to find the person that's either going to have that emotional take or not have it, depending on what you want, right?
Yeah, we could do a whole show just on that, this notion of jury selection, because I always laugh. If I could select the jury, I would never lose a case. We don't get to select the jury. We have a modest ability to deselect individual prospective jurors, but we're largely stuck with the jury that the community sends us. And they're all human beings, and they're not legal technicians. And so we have to make our technical legal argument. We have to have that foundation, ideally. And then we also, at the end, have to kind of, like icing on a cake, put an emotional layer over the top to pitch it, to sell it to the jury as human beings. But the foundation always ought to be, the idea is that it's based on facts and reason. No one should want anyone to be convicted based on emotion, right? I think we would all agree that would be bad.
I've been recently reading Blackstone.
Sure.
And the reason I was reading this is I've been studying, as I usually am, something that one of our founders was writing on. And usually once a week, I'm reading something about the Second Amendment and its roots, right? And like, a lot of Americans don't know that the English had this right of self-defense 100 years before we did. They codified it in a very similar document to our Bill of Rights. And so, like, the ideas you're talking about, it's not like some Americans just sat down in 1776, which isn't a pertinent date, but just said, okay, how do we try criminals? This is old stuff, right?
Right. So this is something that was developed over many hundreds of years of Western civilization. It does tend to be a Western construct, as opposed to they do criminal justice quite differently in Asia, for example, and other cultures. But it was developed over a very long period of time. Yeah, well, they have. Humans traditionally, through human history, tens of thousands of years, justice was very tribal. What was in the best interests of me and mine is what defined justice. And it's really in our Western civilization traditions where we've tried to separate that to lady justice, right? With the blindfold on and the scale and the sword, but she's blind to the participants. No partiality, no bias, no fear, no favor. People similarly situated should be treated in a similar fashion by the law.
I never knew that. I never even paid attention to that. So she's blind, and then she's listening to what's going on and has to weigh it out.
Yep.
Okay. Where did that come from? That whole symbol?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
We got to look that up.
Yeah.
So keep going. I derailed you. We're talking about the history of how these things came to be. And I think here's a good thing I can plug in here. Like, we'll see cases of some pedophile. There was just one in, I think, New York, a police officer. He's a working police officer. I don't think the crime happened while he was on duty, but he had sex with a 13-year-old girl against her will, which I don't think it matters even if she was a willing participant, but it was a forced rape. Anyway, he ends up getting probation and maybe a couple years of like, I don't think he got maybe 15 days or 30 days or some crazy shit. So people hear that and they're like, that's, it's a justice wasn't served. The judges, crooked. The courts are crooked. And I talked about that with my state's attorney friend a few times. And he's like, tried to explain it like we do that versus just let them go because people don't want to testify or they're not good witnesses. Like talk about those kinds of things where it seems like we as non-legal people, we see or hear of these sensational cases like a child getting raped and then the person seemingly goes free or gets a slap on the wrist and we think it's must be some nefarious court employees or some backdoor deals.
Well, we have to keep in mind the criminal justice system isn't it isn't some mechanical computer where you put facts and evidence and law into one end and you crank a handle and you get justice at the other end and some perfect computer did the calculation. It's all human beings. Everyone involved is human beings. The victim, the defendant, the prosecutor, the judge, the jury, everybody. And human beings are imperfect creatures. So, and a prosecutor in particular knows that he has a certain burden he has to satisfy. He has to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt to the satisfaction of a jury within the rules of the game, the rules of due process, the rules of evidence, and a lot of other rules. And he has to make an assessment when a case is brought to him, when he gets that investigative report of how likely is it that he will be able to meet that burden with the tools and materials that he has at his disposal. And if there are witnesses who won't testify and he feels he can't compel them to testify, well, then what's he supposed to do? He doesn't have the materials he needs to build the compelling argument of guilt to get that conviction at the end. Now, is it possible that sometimes prosecutors may actually have the materials and they'll just say we don't? Well, there's nothing I could do. The witness didn't want to testify. Sure, that happens too, because prosecutors also are human beings and they are subject to biases and political pressures and their own self-interest. The vast majority, 90% plus of the prosecutors I've ever dealt with are well-intentioned, good faith civil servants just trying to do a good job for their constituents. But there are unquestionably bad ones out there. I've seen those too. And unfortunately, they undermine public trust in the entire criminal justice system. And when people lose that trust, they may not like a verdict. And I personally, I don't get emotionally invested in verdicts. I never predict verdicts in trials. I don't care that much about what the outcome of a trial is, but I care a lot about the process of getting.
I'm assuming you're talking about viewing them, not if you were the attorney for.
Right. Of course, if you have a client, you're always personally invested. No, as an observer. And people often accuse me of this. Oh, Andrew's out of sorts because the guy he wanted to get acquitted or convicted or whatever, it went the other way. I don't care about these trials I comment on. These people aren't my friends or family. They're not my clients. I don't really care if this person goes to jail or not. It doesn't mean anything to me. But I care a lot about the process. I care a lot about due process of law because if we trust the process, we can accept the outcome, even if it's not what we wanted. But if we don't trust the process, the outcome's worthless. The outcome is nothing. And why would we subject ourselves to the criminal justice system if we cannot trust that it's going to be something resembling a fair process? And every time you see a corrupt prosecutor or a corrupt outcome or a politically energized case where there's good reason to fear that the jury is returning a guilty verdict out of fear of violence, for example, in their community, that's corruption of the process. And that really degrades people's faith in the entire system.
Kind of interesting, talking about Blackstone or our founders. This is where all of this is predicated on virtuous citizens that are upright, honest, in not so much a religious sense, but this moral sense of what we all accept to be right and wrong. Don't lie, don't hurt people, don't take things that don't belong to you, which is often connect to a religious.
And accept the process at all. Right? Have a common cultural understanding of what the process is supposed to be like. We have communities in America now that are advocating, at least within their communities, for Sharia law, for example. That's very different than American traditional due process of law. But that's what they find culturally familiar to them. That's what they'd like to see applied in their community. The phrase, the cliche, of course, is diversity is our strength. But if diversity leads within a single nation or even a state or even a city to very different forms of due process and criminal justice, things can become chaotic pretty quickly.
Yeah, I haven't even thought about that. This idea that people push back, I'm kind of thinking about nowadays. Nobody trusts science. Nobody trusts a doctor. Nobody trusts. You see, it's comical now. Like I used to dig up information, and you'd find something from NIH or World Health Organization or whatever, an FBI stat. I'm scared to even share those statistics now, because people will be like, well, look where you got it from. NIH, they're a corrupt government organization, or World Health Organization, they're corrupt, international, run by this dark hooded figure, organization. It's interesting when you start talking about people pushing back on your opinions. Almost always, like when I have these conversations, the only right answer is, okay, you just want to inflict violence on somebody because you watched this video or you saw this clip or you read the facts of this case. Usually that's not the case. They just saw a video clip, because if they read the facts, maybe they'd have something different. And what you want is you want to unleash some violence. Like you want to hit them with a baseball bat, you want to shoot them with a gun. And as long as that's the acceptable answer, that's cool. So what you want is lawlessness. Like you want your neighbor to be able to come steal your chicken,
and of course that they're always assuming that they're going to win.
Right.
They're going to get into the gunfight and win. They're going to get into the fist fight and win. Which first of all, you have to win the fight, and then you have to win the legal fight afterwards. And there's no guarantees on either of those. There's no magic pixie dust that says the good guy wins the fight, right? You can improve your odds. You can get your risk as close to zero as possible. That's what you do when you train people in self-defense, to get their risk of losing the fight as low as possible. That's what I do in the legal fight. I try to get our members' risks of losing the legal fight as close to zero as possible. But the risks is never zero. No one's Superman. No one's impervious in the physical fight. Things go wrong. Things go sideways. It might not just be your day. And there's no guarantees in the legal fight. Again, you could do everything 100% right and still end up getting convicted. That's just part of the noise in the system. These are high-risk endeavors.
You do a good talk on that. You do it at our S12 event, which we'll have you at in November here of 24. If you guys are watching this past the 24 year, where you talk about that risk is never zero. We've videoed that, and I just got a comment the other day on that, and I don't know what part of the talk the commenter was looking at, but basically you must have been talking about something to do with escalation of force and maybe disparity of force, like somebody getting punched. And he said, well, the law's bullshit. We should change the law because everybody knows that a punch could kill you. And so I responded to this guy and I said, so you think like across the board, somebody throws a punch, you should be able to use a firearm in response to that? And his answer was pretty much yes. And I'm like, man, this is why the founders said not everybody should vote, why not everybody should be able to do certain things. Like, that's your logic. You think if I guess, by his logic, if some woman, and it's not a dig on women, but if a 100-pound woman punched me, I could just draw my pistol and do a bill drill on her chest because, I punched could hurt me.
And there are people that genuinely believe that. They believe, the don't start none, won't be none crowd. That if anyone even touches you with a finger, there's a John Wayne quote to this effect: I don't let people put hands on me. I don't put hands on other people. That if someone so much as touches you with a finger, you should be privileged to use whatever force you want against them. And by the way, if that were the law, that's what I would teach people the law was. And that's what I would do when I go to court. Those are the arguments I would make. I'm not taking a moral position here. In most states, you're not allowed to use deadly force in defense of property. Pets are property. If you talk to a pet owner, they'll say, someone tries to hurt my dog, I'm going to kill him. And they mean it. Well, I get it. I understand. But that's not what the law allows you to do. Now, if the law allowed you to do that, I wouldn't have a moral problem with it. I just do law. I don't do morality. If people want morality, they need to go talk to their pastor. Unfortunately, what I have to caution people is I understand that's what you'd like the law to be. That's not what the law is. You're not going to be judged by your personal standard on use of force. You're going to be standard on what's actually the law, not what the internet says, not what the retired cop down the street tells you, not what the lawyer who did your house closing told you.
I know that retired cop down the street.
Right?
Yeah.
But what the law actually is, and that's what we try to teach our community is, this is what the law actually is. I don't tell people what to do. You want to shoot someone? I can't stop you from shooting someone. All I can try to do is help you develop an informed understanding of what the consequences of that will be under those circumstances. And then it's up to you to decide if you want to risk or accept those consequences.
As I started to bring up earlier, my state's attorney, people are constantly asking him, I've asked him, like, why the hell did this case go this way? And like, man, the loss, like, it just seems so crazy. And I've heard him say this to people. He said it to me, and I hear your viewpoint. He goes, it's not perfect, but like in what all the world's tried and done, even bail, like now we've got bail reform. I just was listening to a kid locally got involved in some domestic thing, and he's now got an ankle monitor on him. And he's got 2 ankle monitors. I don't know what they both do. And this is just pre-trial condition stuff. And it's costing him $570 a month.
Yeah, those ankle monitors are expensive. People don't know, but they cost a lot of money.
Like, it's not, there's no bail. It's just now it's diverted to another path, and there's some organizations making some money off of it. But anyway, his point is, like, with all the crap that we humans have sorted out, it's about the best system to like weigh out the inner human conflicts that arise. And like, what's your thoughts on that? Like, can it be better? What could we do to make the criminal courts, civil courts better?
I mean, you can always tweak things and try things. And if you're operating in good faith, then you take a look at the results and see to me, it's always, what are the outcomes we're getting? Are we getting better outcomes? Then it was probably a good change. If we're getting worse outcomes, then it probably wasn't a prudent change. Nothing's ever going to change the fact that all these things are being implemented by human beings with all their imperfections, with their misjudgments, with their biases, their political biases, their social biases. The most we can hope for is these imperfect human beings will be operating in good faith. Where things really go awry is when they're not operating in good faith, where we see politically motivated prosecutions, for example, politically motivated changes. Now, for example, the bail question. I can see arguments on both sides because I see how bail affects people. If you have a genuine violent actor, he attacks someone, certainly his victim living in that same neighborhood wants that person locked up. They don't want that dangerous person out on the street again, down the street from where they live, prepared to attack them again for reasons real or imaginary. On the other hand, I see people who get arrested over, it's really questionable whether or not they committed some criminal offense, but the cops feel there's enough for probable cause, so they get charged. And then they get bail, and they can't afford the bail, and they can't go to work. And they lose their job, and they can't pay their rent. And now their family is getting kicked out of the apartment. And there are some places in this country, believe it or not, where you might not get arraigned, even have a bail offer, or be able to question a bail decision for weeks. For weeks, you could be sitting in that local jail. Months could go by. And your family can't pay the rent. So what do you think is going to happen to them? So I can understand people who are sympathetic to that scenario, and also people who are saying, listen, there are dangerous people out here in our community. And if they act in a dangerous way, we need to secure the safety of the community by securing those people in a locked up facility, unless they can convince us that they are going to obey the law, obey the conditions of bail release, come back to court when they're supposed to come back. So I think there's a balancing there that needs to be adjusted. I think a lot of these states, like New York, I'm not sure what's happening in your state. Like New York went crazy. They basically did away with bail entirely.
Yeah, we did that.
Yeah. I mean, that's nuts because, again, bad people do exist. I think what happens is people take the sympathetic argument. Oh, what if it was your neighbor who you know to be a good guy and he gets in some kerfuffle and now he's sitting in jail for several weeks because he can't afford $100,000 bail? By the way, in most states, that $100,000 bail, no one has $100,000 sitting in their mattress for bail money, right? So he goes to a bail bondsman, and the bail bondsman wants $10,000, 10% of that 100, and you never get that money back. That's the fee to the bail bondsman. 10 grand's a lot of money, folks. So even if he can scrape, where's he going to get it? Friends, family, his parents, wherever he can beg, borrow, and steal the money, but it's gone forever. I mean, how long is he going to have to work to pay that? Even if it turns out the charges are dropped, even if it turns out he's acquitted, even if it turns out he takes some kind of misdemeanor plea deal to avoid having to go to trial, that 10 grand is gone forever. So it can be very, very punishing for people we might think shouldn't really receive that kind of punishment.
And then you start to talk about, and which is a rabbit hole I don't want to waste a bunch of time on, but policing, where maybe you have some overzealous police officers, or there's a community near me that since pretty much disbanded the police department. Per capita, they wrote more DUIs. It's a little village of like 400 people. They were writing thousands of DUIs a year. So basically, like any work van or work truck that drove through the community, they just got DUIs. And people were like, there were guys like, I had not drank alcohol ever in my life, and they're getting a DUI, and they had some like some kind of like village ordinance that if you even received this ticket, it was like a $5,000 fine to the city. So each one of these, even when they were thrown out of court, they were getting $5,000, and it turned into like a federal case. And a painter got pulled over one day. The guy does not drink, doesn't do drugs, and he like turned it into his life's mission, where he dismantled this little police department. It took years. He created a Facebook page. It was like, who's been screwed by Bow Valley was the name of the police department. And like that stuff happens too. And I think that's probably more rare than people think, but there's definitely some bad coppers out there too.
Yeah. And people have a exceptionally visceral reaction to bad police, as they should, by the way. I'm not saying that that's an inappropriate response, because we give police so much authority, right? We give them that uniform, we give them the badge, you have to obey their lawful commands. It's not a citizen's arrest scenario. They have legal authority over other citizens that, non-police don't have. And it's kind of authority where if you give it to a good person, it's not a problem. But if you give it to a bad person, it's a serious fucking problem. Mm-hmm. And the same is true with prosecutors. So prosecutors have unbelievable power and authority. And traditionally, in most communities, the prosecutor was some long-standing member of the legal community. He'd been a lawyer there for 30 years. He'd been the prosecutor for the last 20 years. Everyone knew him. He was kind of a steady hand at the tiller. He did not abuse his power. But I see plenty of cases where that guy runs for re-election, and all of a sudden there's a George Soros-funded 25-year-old, fresh out of law school, Marxist lawyer with 100,000. So most prosecutor races, people don't know this, but if there's even someone contesting the prosecutor's seat, it's another old person from the legal community, and they're spending like a couple grand on this race for prosecutor. If somebody like George Soros or one of his organizations drops $100,000 in some prosecutor's race, they just bought that seat. And then they put some little Marxist in there, and now that same unbelievable authority and discretion that was not a problem because it was not being abused with the traditional prosecutor is now in the hands of someone who was elected explicitly for political reasons and is going to use that power and abuse it for political purposes. And that's why we see so many of our urban centers turn into, non-prosecutorial, steal anything you want, do anything you want. We're not going to charge you. If we do charge you, we're going to make it a misdemeanor. We're not going to hold anybody accountable. And of course, it's like a vacuum for attracting every criminal in the vicinity into that region because they know they can run amok.
Not going to do it again. Not going to get anything happen to me. I just saw that horrible news story the other day in what's the city in California that's gone crazy? I can't think of the name. the bigger city up north.
Oakland, San Francisco, Sacramento.
Yeah, I think it was Oakland. Doesn't matter. But there was like one of those street takeovers where they're doing donuts and burnouts in the street, and it was pretty late, and there's a little gas station. and it's closed. The employees are in there locking up and putting the register away and all that. And so people want to buy some whatever drinks or something, and they're pounding on the door. They can't get in, so they break the glass and they loot the entire store. I mean, it looks like Fallujah. The thing is just done. Smash everything that can't be stolen. And they're interviewing the employees. Called 911. Nobody came for I think 9 hours. And which is meaningless, right? Everything's stolen. But because of the amount of theft, the insurance company dropped this man's insurance for theft of the goods that were in the store. So he's completely wiped out of everything, and nobody's caught. And that's just the end of it. And his building is destroyed and all of his stuff is gone. So you look at situations like that, which seem pretty common now, and then you see these comments online, it's pretty easy, I think, to understand why somebody would have a very visceral emotional response like that's that man's livelihood. And he said that in the video, like, this is how I take care of my family. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I think it's easy for a viewer to see that and be like, man, what if somebody just made my bank account go away or just smashed my ability to go to work?
And it's remarkably easy to create that kind of environment because just imagine like a target, right? With a 10 ring, a 9 ring, an 8 ring. To create that kind of environment, all you have to do is not prosecute and hold accountable the 10 ring. Because that 10 ring, like this robbery of this liquor store, not that many people are willing to actually smash out the glass in front of a liquor store. That's the guy in the 10 ring. But once the glass is smashed out, there's 100 people in the 9 ring that'll go through that broken door to steal liquor, right? And then there's another 100 people outside of that who'll buy liquor from the guys who stole it right outside the liquor store, right? They set up their own little mini liquor store right there, selling the stuff that they stole. And it has this cascading effect. Whereas if you stop the people in the 10 ring, none of the rest would happen, right? If the glass is never broken, the liquor store is never looted. So all we have to do, people who want to achieve chaos in society, all they have to do to achieve that chaos is not hold accountable that relatively minuscule number of people who are in the 10 ring, who are the ones that act as a catalyst for all the cascading chaos that follows after them.
That's very interesting.
If you just lock up that small number of people, this is also known as the broken window effect, right? If you stop small crimes in a community, you tend not to get the larger crimes, right? New York City had this with turnstile jumpers, right? If you just stop them, suddenly it turns out that a lot of the muggings in the subway system don't happen. Because who's committing those? Well, the same people who are jumping the turnstiles.
Jumping the turnstile. Okay. That makes good sense. That's super interesting. Let's switch gears a little bit. Port St. Lucie, Florida. I think this is a good one to segue into talking about why people hate Andrew Branca. So this video, I shared it. Tons of people shared it. It's become this all too common situation where somebody's doing something with a gun they shouldn't. We can plug the video in here for a second so the viewers that didn't see it. But I'll just narrate real quick what happens. The footage that we were allowed to have access to was filmed from the passenger of the victim. In this case is a pickup truck, male driver, female passenger, a sedan or a little coupe actually passes them in a neighborhood, hits the brakes. A guy jumps out and walks up yelling with a pistol. And then there's a little 30-second verbal altercation between them. The driver of the pickup truck, the victim, has a gun in his lap, and the aggressor's got a Glock, looks like a Glock 19 or something about that size in his hand. Good trigger finger discipline the whole time, and he walks off. So the comments, man, are like, I'd put a 6 in his chest as soon as he got out of the car, and talk about that a little bit.
Well, the legal question is always the same, and it's not rocket science. The law of self-defense is actually pretty straightforward. So the question is, was the defender facing a reasonably perceived imminent threat of unlawful death or serious bodily injury? If those boxes are checked off, then technically speaking, you're legally privileged to use deadly force in self-defense. Now, of course, whether or not those boxes are checked off is decided at multiple levels, right? It's decided the defender's making a decision, hopefully if he's informed. First of all, we have to assume he even knows what the correct legal question is, which most people don't know. But even if he knows what the correct legal question is, he has to make that calculation in his mind in the moment, right? While he's evaluating the threat. Have those boxes been checked? And he knows that unless they're all checked, he can't lawfully use deadly force in self-defense. But even if he does that, and he's correct, and it's true, and he uses deadly force in self-defense, and it's technically 100% legal, the next step is other people are making their assessment. The cops who arrive on the scene are asking the same question. The prosecutor, when he gets the investigative report, is asking the same question and coming to his own decision. The judge is doing that. The jury is doing that. And none of those people were actually there, right? None of them have personal knowledge of what happened. All they can do is look at the available evidence and try to make reasonable inferences from the evidence. But one of the reasons you can do everything right and still get convicted is because those people are looking at different things than what you looked at. The guy sitting in the car with the gun in his lap, he's seeing and experiencing something different than what we're seeing and experiencing when we're watching the video his wife is making on the call, right? Could be 100 different things. Could be alcohol on that other dude's breath. We're not going to get that on a cell phone video, right? It could be some prior history he might have with this dude. That's not captured on the cell phone video, right? Maybe there's a people known to them. Maybe there's some existing animus here. There's lots of factors that could be considered that we wouldn't know, that a jury might not know. And a lot of this stuff that might be evidence might not be, the judge might say that's not admissible in court. So the jury's never even going to hear about any of that kind of stuff. It may be known to the defender, it's playing a role in his decision-making, but when the jury has to come to its decision, they don't know. Maybe this defender is well-trained. Maybe he has a lot of knowledge about guns and tooler drill and terminal ballistics and all this kind of stuff. The jury doesn't have any of that. The jury will not know any of that. So when the jury's making its calculation about what's reasonable, whether that legal question has been answered in the affirmative, they could easily arrive at a different answer than the defender. In their own minds, correctly so, and the result is a guilty verdict. And if it's a guilty verdict, you're looking at a lot of time in prison. This guy in Port St. Lucie is looking at a mandatory minimum 16 years in prison. And
you're talking about the aggressor that came up to the car window
from the Mercedes. I should put that in quotes. The Mercedes.
What do you mean by that?
We were talking before we started recording, and I told Mickey, well, if I were that guy, that aggressor, I might be irritable too. He's driving the Toyota Celica of Mercedes. It's a pretty budget Mercedes.
You're such an elitist. And I know you've got whitey tighties on with no freaking pants right now. That's funny. So that seems to be like the hinge point that I have run into a lot having these discussions. Like, yes, you may in that moment, that might be your only option, so you choose to pull the trigger. But then people are not willing to accept that this whole other cascade of events might unfold where I don't know how many people responded on our Instagram post of that or on the YouTube post of it. I would have just put it in reverse, or I would have just drove forward. I would have just drove backwards. So that was like a huge crowd of people. I would have drove over him, a smaller group of people. Cause in my mind, I mean, that's probably a pretty hard bridge for many humans to cross, to drive over another human being. Like that's that's like, I don't know, it's like doing a lot of things we're not conditioned to do. So there's a few, like I just drove over him, and then there's plenty of them I would have just shot him. I would have shot through the door when he was standing next to me. Like these are all interesting takes. Like really you'd have shot through the door while he's pointing a gun like that's leveled on your windowsill towards you. Like you would have just decided, F it, I'm about to engage in a like Old West gun battle at contact distance. Like I know that guy's never thought about it. So comment a little bit on that stuff.
Well, I mean, like I mentioned before, the risk of getting convicted, even if you do everything perfectly, is always greater than zero. So I just tell people, if you get in a gunfight, no matter how legally justified you may be, just assume you're going to get convicted. Assume you're going to get convicted. You're going to be sentenced to 10, 20, 30, maybe life in prison. There are things that are worth a life sentence in prison. I would rather be serving life in prison than watch my wife get murdered next to me, for example. But it's not a very long list of things. And I would need to be very, very convinced that I was willing to incur possible life in prison before I pulled that trigger in an act of self-defense. Now, if I was convinced, I would have no hesitation about pulling that trigger. And this is something I've thought about all my adult life. I look at these use of force scenarios and I know the law and I shoot reasonably well. And I think to myself, what would I do in this circumstance? Is this one of those circumstances where I would feel it absolutely necessary, consistent with my safety, the safety of people I have a duty to protect, that I've got to press the trigger here? And if I end up in prison for the rest of my life, I can accept that outcome. That last day in prison, I could look in the mirror in my cell and say, it was still worth it. Pressing that trigger was still the right thing to do. And I've made the decision long ago that if those circumstances are satisfied, well, that guy's probably going to get shot. I'm going to do my very best to make sure he's neutralized as a threat to myself and those I have a duty to protect. One of the most disturbing parts about this video in Port St. Lucie was when that guy in the driver's seat starts saying, should I shoot him? Man, you should not be asking other people that question. You need to be asking yourself that question. And you need to have asked yourself that question long before you find yourself in this scenario. If you're asking someone next to you that question, you're not the guy who needs to have the gun. You just are not prepared for that confrontation. Not mentally prepared for that confrontation.
It's probably a good point to also tell folks that don't know, you do train. You train firearms, you're a martial artist, you practice jiu-jitsu. You were one of the first, like, how low down the IDPA hole are you?
Oh, I think they have 25,000 members now. My IDPA number is 13.
13. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty low. So you have been training and practicing the craft of self-defense for a long, long time. So you're not just talking about this stuff from a textbook perspective. Yeah, looking at that video, I'm not a gunfighter. I shoot a lot of guns. And a lot of people said, well, you can't miss at that distance. Well, yeah, you can definitely miss, and he can get lucky. And then you start thinking about the tactical problem. I'm engaging with somebody that's off to my left. I can't move. I'm trapped in this seat. He can move. So now I've got to track him if he decides to move. And he's pointing at me with my wife. That's the backstop for his bullets. Like, is that a transaction I'm willing to partake in?
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know about you. I look at stuff like that, knowing what we know from the video. I'm like, why didn't you just peel off down a side street and drive to Walmart for 10 minutes, or drive to the local police station, or drive away and this guy was following them, I guess. So I found a little bit out. I told you before the call, I got a phone call from the neighbor of the driver. And sometimes this stuff happens. I'm sure it's happened to you, where somebody will see something you post and then you get an email or a phone call. So this guy emailed and called me, and apparently which for us, the viewers, you can comment on this. Like, a lot of this stuff is immaterial to what happened, but apparently that the driver in the BMW or the Mercedes had done some violent crap in the neighborhood previously. So your comment about, like, previous knowledge, like, they know this guy's a hothead, they know he's prone to violence, but they just were trying to go home, and apparently he's following them and, like, passing them and getting behind them, and, like, they're doing some, like, Frogger bullshit on the road trying to get away from each other. But then the driver pulls into his own neighborhood, the pickup truck. Like, why'd you go home? Why'd you, like, let this guy follow you home down this, like, little tiny side street? So it's like, I'd have never stopped either. I'm in a pickup truck and you're in a little car. As soon as you hit the brakes, I'd have taken a mailbox out. I'd have drove in somebody's lawn.
Honey, we're going to Disney.
Right.
You can follow us to Orlando.
Would you have stopped your car in that situation?
No, not unless it was unavoidable. I mean, sometimes you run into traffic, or there's a red light, or you have to stop, right? There's nothing you can do.
Sure. I mean, that situation where there's an open road in front of you.
I would do everything in my power not to get engaged in a confrontation. I always urge people, don't get into fights you don't need to be getting into. Most of the cases I consult on, and they're all felony cases, people, normal law-abiding people, never been in trouble with the law a day in their lives, are looking at 10 or 20 years in prison. And we have a very high success rate. But almost invariably, when I look at those cases, I see exits off that super highway to displaying a gun that those people could have taken. If they thought about it before, they could have, as you said, turned down a side street. They could have done other things but display the gun. And once the gun comes out, you're effectively looking at a felony charge. If anybody wants to charge you with a felony, because we know we're doing it for lawful purposes, right? But to an outside observer, when you display a gun for the purpose of changing someone else's behavior, even if you never fire a shot, you've just checked every box for the felony of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon that now you have to justify as self-defense. And a typical retainer for your lead counsel for a felony ag assault with a weapon charge is going to be in the range of $30,000 to $50,000. That money's just gone. That's just legal expenses that you're paying.
But so it's my right.
It's your right. Well,
my right.
If you have to do it, then you have to do it. But if you have an option, you might want to think about exercising that option before you're compelled to drop 30 to 50 grand on a lawyer. Because even if he immediately gets the charges dismissed, which would be a huge win, you're still out that money. And that's a lot of money.
In my recent research, the last month or two, on this idea of self-defense and the right to use force, I found even the ancients weren't clear on this. I think Aristotle or Plato, I don't have these quotes memorized, but one of them was talking about needing to be backed into a wall before somebody draws their sword and pokes a hole in another person. Whereas I've heard some of these other ancients say, if thieves come to rob you and deprive you of your goods, you can call your neighbors and they can draw their swords and you can just hack these people up. I'm paraphrasing, and there will be no crime against you because, hey, they were trying to deprive you of your property. And there was even more recent people like John Locke. There was a couple of his phrases where he was pretty down with using force. If you try to deprive somebody of liberty or of property, he was like, yeah, go ahead, shoot them up. But then there's others that were more conscientious, that you needed to try to create distance, try to create space, and this idea of the castle doctrine that some of them spoke about. I really appreciate how thoughtful they were about it in those times and in present. But I think that concept, well, my vehicle in my state is considered my domicile while I'm in it, so it's the castle doctrine. So if he walked up to me, that was my front door that he walked up to and pointed a gun through, so I can smoke him. Comment on some of these things. That was kind of a lot.
I mean, so there's a lot of technical legal detail we could go into. Most of the time, it doesn't really matter. Most of the time, if someone's anywhere and an aggressive manner is pointing a gun at your face, they're an unlawful deadly force threat that you can defend yourself against. And you don't need to worry about things like the castle doctrine or stand your ground or duty to retreat or any of that nonsense. You're facing an eminent deadly force threat, which is what's required to justify your use of deadly force in self-defense. All this other stuff, frankly, is mostly stuff that your lawyer should be worrying about after the fact. It should not be things you're doing to justify your use of deadly force. If you're shooting someone just because castle doctrine, you're probably doing it wrong. Because what's required is the imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. Historically, of course, through most of human history, we didn't have firearms. This whole stand your ground idea is almost uniquely American because it was during the American history that the private possession of firearms was so popular. Popular meaning not popular in a rock band sense, but popular in that everyone in the populace had arms, and it was just understood that they had a right to keep and possess arms. There really was virtually no gun control at all in the founding period, which is why after the recent Supreme Court decisions, the gun controllers have been having so much trouble because now they're required to point to history and tradition of gun control in America, and there really isn't any, hardly any. So really, all
Yeah.
modern gun control laws are facially unconstitutional at this point. But the duty to retreat kind of makes sense if you consider a world, which was the normal human world for most of our history, in which there were no guns, in which weapons were typically contact weapons. They were knives or swords or clubs or fists. And if you could create a little distance, 10, 20, 30 feet from somebody, well, then you are out of reach of that weapon. You could secure your safety simply by retreating a bit. And in that context, requiring a legal duty to retreat before you could kill someone kind of makes sense. You have a safe option other than having to take someone else's life. That all changes, of course, if everyone's carrying around a gun, because you're not going to retreat at 1,000 feet per second from someone's 9mm pistol. So it's really unique to the American experience that we say, hey, we recognize we're America. We all have guns. And if someone's threatening you with a projectile weapon that can fire hot pieces of lead at 1,000 feet per second, we're not going to tell you got to try to jog away before you can defend yourself against that threat.
It's the more I listen to conversations on this, talk about this, the more firmly I'm convinced people need to study not just history, but I'm sad at how little basic understanding of civics, and not even just the judicial system, but just our government as a whole, how it works. It seems like if people had a better understanding of it, maybe they would be less prone to put themselves into that system, into the judicial system, with maybe acting out when they could have got away, or it's my right to display this force. I used that pseudo-Southern accent in a video recently, and somebody commented that they find it insulting that I use a dumb Southerner accent. So sorry if you're from the South. It just fits. I love my Southern friends.
Yeah, I mean, you could do a Charlestown accent. Their dummies are everywhere.
So I guess here's maybe another thought to pose to you. As we're talking about all of this legal stuff pertaining to self-defense, you've got a background in this stuff, the training side of things. You look at that kind of a simple shooting problem. You've got this guy a couple feet away from you. You're trapped in a vehicle. Let's talk about that a little bit from a technical standpoint. You got a client calling you.
Yeah, sorry about that. Well, I mean, how can I put it? I was going to say it's not a complicated shooting problem. It's not a complicated shooting problem if you're competent. It's not complicated. If you're just a guy who got a concealed carry permit and got a gun and stuck it on his belt, holding it in his lap, and you've never fired more than 50 rounds through that gun, we talk about missing. I mean, I've been at like steel matches. I don't know how many people have shot steel matches, but there's a series like 5 or 6 courses of fire. You have to shoot 5 steel plates. Some of these steel plates are huge. They're like 2 foot by 3 foot. Maybe they're bigger than that. And they're only a few feet away. And I see people miss those things all the time. It's like, how could you possibly miss that giant piece of steel right in front of you? But when you're trying to go quick, under pressure, you don't want to embarrass yourself in front of your friends, all that kind of stuff, misses can happen. Shooting handguns is not complicated, but we make it difficult because we mess up the shot, right? Fundamentally, it's very straightforward. You align the sights on the target, you depress the trigger without changing the sight alignment, you'll hit. You can do that holding the gun upside down. You could do that laying on your back. You could do that suspended from a rope. Doesn't matter. As long as you do those 2 things, you're highly likely to hit the target. Yet we miss all the time. Trained police officers, I think, hit maybe 30% of the shots they fire actually hit the intended target. So,
and this isn't violence that we're talking about.
This is in
You're
violence.
talking about
right. The police, right, in use of force events, right? Hopefully not at the range. That would be that would be horrific at the range. Hopefully they're doing better than that when they qualify. But yeah, under the stress of having to shoot a gun under pressure. So I mean, one of the things you want to be able to do if you're concerned about being able to effectively defend yourself in this kind of use of force event is, well, when was the last time you fired that gun under any kind of stress? Whether it's training stress, whether it's competitive shooting stress. If all you do is shoot on a square range a couple times a year, which is more than most people who have guns do, frankly, unfortunately, How well do you actually think you're going to perform under this kind of pressure? Someone's threatening you with a gun from feet away, and now you're contemplating, all right, maybe should I take the shot or should I not take the shot? And of course, I saw the show you did on this earlier, and I agreed with everything you said. And one of the considerations, of course, is, you're in a community. There's homes there. There's wives, there's children, there's innocent people all around. Every one of your misses, bullets don't miss, right? They keep going until they hit something. It may not be what you intended to be hit, but they always hit something. They don't just disappear into the vapor. And while if you are acting in self-defense, firing rounds in lawful self-defense, and you hit an innocent person, there may not be criminal liability for that innocent person being hit. There are legal arguments to be made there, but you still have to sleep with that. You killed someone, you maimed somebody, you crippled somebody, you turned somebody into a vegetable that has to be taken care of for the rest of their lives because of your bullet that hit them, because you missed. So that's something that has to be taken into consideration.
Let me make one comment to that. There was a commenter on that YouTube video that identified himself as a retired police officer. He was trying to make sure we understood that he knew about use of force and that. And he said, he was commenting about if my round hit a house or something. He said, in this situation, that's not my fault. It's the fault of the person that made me do it. And I understand his point, but it's like, but they did make me do this, but I still sent the round into that schoolyard or whatever. Of course, we always choose the school bus load of children or whatever, but it's, they maybe made me do it, but I still did it. Like, I got to go to sleep at night and think about that. Like, is that, and he was pretty matter of fact about it. Maybe that's no different than deciding when I would pull the trigger. Like, maybe that's part of that equation. I must accept that if I fire a gun in violence, something else bad could happen. Thus, I accept that. But I just wanted to, share that with people, because I personally don't want that on my conscience.
And of course, you have to accept some risk. I mean, most of us, if we're going to get, heaven forbid, in a gunfight, it's probably not in the open ocean, right? Where it's impossible for someone to be downrange, right? Generally, it's going to be in some populated area. So there's always some risk. There's some risk that somebody's downrange that could be hit. But we ought to want to minimize that risk to as close to zero as possible, both because we don't want to hurt innocent people, and also, as you say, what's important now? What is the mission if you're in a gunfight? It's to neutralize that threat before they put a bullet in your noggin. It's not the person who shoots fast that wins the gunfight, right? It's the person who hits fast, gets effective hits fast. All those misses you're firing into that neighborhood, into those backyards, they're not doing anything to the guy who's trying to shoot you back. So even setting aside the altruistic reasons for not wanting misses, you ought to not want misses because you need hits to solve the problem.
True. I was just thinking about that. That would have been, for me, support hand shooting, most likely. Because I maybe could do this as the driver's seat, but it'd probably be offhand shooting, off to the side, facing this way, kind of moving in this axis. It's not hard shooting, but how often are people practicing shooting from a seated position? IDPA, people, if they don't know, you may get stages where you're sitting at a table or sitting in a seated position. And I've even seen some stages where there's a car door hung, people've got a door and you're shooting through the open car door. If you've never seen that, I think it's pretty easy to say it's not a hard shot until you find yourself, shit. I just was with some students a few weeks ago on the East Coast, and we're talking at lunch, and you probably see this thing you're talking about. I've heard you say some of the things you're saying. Your thought about the there's not zero chance of, like, you say the stuff so much that to you it's like like the old hat, and these guys are like awestruck with some of the drills that we're doing. And to me, it was just like, this is really boring. And not boring, but like whatever. And I go, well, what do you normally do? And, they're very basic. They put the bullseye target up on the side of a fence post or something, and they are firing, half a magazine, and then they go take a break, and they're just slow static fire. So to do anything other than that was like, and then you think about, okay, now you're going to go from this thing where you're completely isolated and controlled, standing static, to now you're sitting in a vehicle, heart's going, you got your woman next to you, barking in your ear, and you're all adrenalized.
That's the worst, man. Women get more guys killed by inserting themselves into arguments.
Hey, ladies, don't get upset. We're just having fun. But women do get guys killed.
Oh man! Every time I look at one of these confrontations where I see two guys, kind of chest bumping on the street, and it's like, it'll probably be okay. And then I see a woman insert herself in the fight. I'm like, oh, someone's gonna die now.
That is a strange phenomenon. I've told this story of
because now the guy, whoever's woman that is, that guy can't back down now, right in front of this woman. So it's got to escalate now.
And then if the other one even touches her to get her off, now you touched or hit my woman. Yeah, that stuff's nuts. Like you've got 450 pounds of flesh and 100-pound chicks gonna hold those two guys apart. Yeah, that's dumb. That's that emotional stuff. I wonder, like what the world would be like if people, you see these crazy things. You're in Colorado. This stuff we're seeing where like there's apartments taken over, which there's a lot of misinformation on that, because I've called friends on Chicago police where they're talking about apartments being taken over by gangs, and I've called friends in Aurora, and what some of these news outlets, or rather social media outlets, are sharing is not entirely accurate. There's a lot of telephone game stuff, but you see people like, let's just get the group of our boys and go fix the problem, like that whole idea. That's that tribal thing you're talking about, which I get. Like, yes, we want to protect our homes, but now you're the arbiter of what's right. You and your boys, like, where's it stop? Like, you're going to go hang everybody that you don't like, and then like, is there going to be a couple guys that just got caught up and they're like, fuck it, you were nearby, hang them too, or shoot them?
And just imagine if the scenario that they're perceiving were real, right? That these hyper-violent Venezuelan gangs have taken over this apartment complex, and now they're going to go in there and settle their stuff. Those guys are not afraid of guns. They're not afraid of your guns. A lot of these guys, a lot of criminal defendants I used to represent, they'd been shot before. And they were still alive to be criminal defendants now. They're not that impressed with your gun. And they have guns too. You're not the only person with a gun in that fight. And they have all the pride and ego and everything else that human beings have, that they want to win that fight, especially if you bring a fight to them in what they perceive as their turf, right? You're an invader in their turf. So first you have to win that gunfight. And by the way, no offense to anybody in the community, but if anyone who's been to the NRA annual meeting or SHOT Show has seen plenty of people walking around wearing all kinds of combat gear who, if they ran up a flight of stairs, would have a heart attack. So, not everyone who's talking these tough words appears to be physically prepared to actually engage in physical violence and win that encounter. But even if you do all that, then you have to win the legal fight afterwards, because guess what? There's nothing that says the legal criminal justice system is going to come to you and pat you on the back and say, good job. They're likely to charge you with murder. By the way, everyone involved, even a guy who never fired a shot but was just part of that vigilante group, he's a co-conspirator as far as the prosecutors are concerned. And he's just as guilty as the people who fired the fatal shots. So now you're getting charged on that basis. Maybe you violated someone's civil rights, and now you're being charged on a federal level as well as the state level. So the world of hurt you just put yourself in, taking the law into your own hands, is virtually beyond comprehension. Just look at what the federal government is doing to the January 6th protesters. They would do that times 1,000 to you.
These are interesting discussions, because at the same time, I think people hate Andrew Branca. I made this note when we started, because you burst their bubble of their, I joke with students sometimes. I think it's very normal, especially for men, to fantasize about being heroes. As a boy, you watch Westerns or superhero movies. And so it's a very normal, I used to talk about this with Dr. William April, rest in peace. He would comment about this like idea of being the hero figure. So I'll joke with students sometimes, and I'll say, I know, like, I'll just be poking fun. I know you want to be that guy that's got your freaking, sub-second draw at the mall, and you're going to position yourself before the event so that there's 4 or 5 4K cameras with perfect lighting catching the footage, glinting off of your polished up Glock, looking so perfect. And you'll make sure you always have a good haircut so you look good, and your flat tummy with your grunt style t-shirt on or whatever, and you're going to smoke the bad guy and hug the girl. Like, we've got that idea, and there's nothing wrong with doing right, but it's almost like we're not allowed to ever do the right thing. If we listen to you, or we look at all these problems, it's like, well, I should never defend myself. I should never stop evil because I'm screwed either way. Like, it's what it almost always feels like.
And I get that a lot. And I often, it's not uncommon when I used to do travel classes. I was teaching 40, 45 times a year, traveling all over the country. I would teach a class at some gun store someplace, and someone would come up to me after the class and say, you just scared the crap out of me. I'm not going to carry a gun anymore because I'm afraid of the trouble I could get you if I use that gun. And that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to scare people into not. I carry a gun. I've carried a gun every day of my adult life. I encourage people to responsibly carry guns for personal protection. A gun, again, I've carried a gun every day of my adult life. I've never even had to take that gun out of the holster once in all those decades of me carrying a gun. A gun is very rarely the answer to whatever problem you're facing. That said, if the gun is the answer, the gun is almost always the only answer that's going to solve that problem. So I think it's important, if you're responsible and capable, to carry a gun on your person if the law allows wherever you live. And if it doesn't, maybe you should consider moving.
But there are consequences. Please expound really quick on the point of, if it is the answer, it's probably the only answer.
Because the circumstances under which you go to the gun should be so dire that there really is no other option. You're facing an imminent threat of death or physical bodily injury, or someone you have a duty to protect is facing an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, maiming injury. It's about to happen right now. That means
imminent. Right now.
Imminent. It's either actually occurring, shots are coming at you, or they're immediately about to come at you. They're going to happen in the next moment. They're not some past threat that's over. They're not some speculative future threat. It's about to drop right now, is your perception of the event. If that's the case, what else but a gun is going to solve that deadly force problem? I don't see. Now, I guess theoretically, could there be some magical barrier that you could drop between you? But like, for example, a lot of this retreat stuff, even if there is a duty to retreat, as a practical matter, if we assume you're facing an imminent threat, an immediate threat of death or serious bodily injury, is retreat really an option? I mean, if someone's drawing a gun on you, they've said they're going to kill you, you can't run away from that gun with complete safety, which is what the duty to retreat calls for. You're only ever required to attempt retreat if you can do it with complete safety. So in those circumstances, then I think a gun is the only thing, or the best option you'll have to neutralize that deadly force threat against you. Where I see people get in trouble is where they go to the gun and those conditions have not yet been met. They got scared, or their ego is engaged, or whatever reason, like the guy in the Mercedes in this little video, right? He went to the gun for what? What was his justification for going to the gun? I don't see any in that video. He went to the gun anyway. And of course, now he's charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon as a result.
You talked about the duty to retreat a little bit. I think it's a good spot to kind of dig into that. So we hear that there's all these buzzwords in the community of armed defenders, and there is a bunch of like silos of people. Like, there's the dudes that are real heavy in competition, and oftentimes those guys that I know, GM level, master class, or even lower tiered shooters, but they're really invested in the craft of sport. They understand some of this stuff, but they're more interested in the sporting competitive aspect. There's the total geek that's got 8 flashlights, 2 pistols, 37 magazines. There's that guy. And usually that guy really kinds to geek out on some of the stuff we're talking about.
And he knows the lumens. He knows all the lumens on every one of those lights.
Yeah, that's funny. That's super right. But then then you got like the guy that bought the gun and doesn't, he's kind of read an article or two. He took the concealed carry course. There's like these buzzwords like, well, are you in a duty to retreat state? Are you in a stand your ground state? And we say duty to retreat. And I think people often think guns, or I'm in this lethal force encounter. Okay, I better retreat. Okay, I've retreated. Now I can shoot back. I think what you just said is that that might have been 5 minutes before or 30 seconds before when the FU chest pushing was happening, or the cars are flicking each other off. Like, did you continue to engage or did you disengage? Like, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So strictly speaking, when we talk about the duty to retreat, it's really when you're making the decision on whether to use deadly force, did you have a safe opportunity to retreat before resorting to that deadly force? So it's really a decision that's made in the moment. That's what the duty of retreat is really about. There's another way of looking at this that takes a wider temporal view. So 5 minutes earlier, when this beef was not at the physical level, but somebody was talking in a movie theater or something. Somebody was using foul language at the next table in the restaurant when you're there with your wife and your kids. So it's just kind of a low-level verbal thing. It hasn't spooled up yet. There's no legal duty to retreat there because there's no use of force being contemplated. But would it be prudent to retreat? Would it be prudent to apply foresight to think to yourself, I could verbally engage this guy, and I'm in the right. He's acting like a jackass. But would it be the first time in history that a modest verbal altercation began to spin up into something more heated, more aggravated, and ended up at a physical level where now you've got a dead guy on the ground with your bullet in that dude? When if you had just left at the beginning, none of that would have had to have happened. Now, you're not legally required to leave the movie theater or walk out of the restaurant. You have your rights. You can assert your rights. You have every right to be there just as much as the other guy. But when I talked earlier about a lot of the cases I work where people are charged with felonies, when I look at the facts, I see a lot of exits off that superhighway to displaying a gun. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. Mature adults should be applying foresight. They should be thinking to themselves, all right, if I chastise this dude for acting like a jackass, I don't know anything about him. I don't know what kind of day he's having or how mentally unstable he is or whether he's going to feel now he has to get his ego engaged because I just said something to him that embarrasses him in front of his woman and now it's going to be a fight. I'm not doing any of that. Me personally, Attorney Andrew Branca, I'm not doing any of that. Partly because I've got a gun on me and I know I'm always thinking this could potentially end up in a gunfight. And I don't want it to end up in a gunfight. That's the last thing in the world I want. I'm going to do everything in my power to avoid having to go to that gun. Heaven forbid I ever have to shoot somebody. I need to know in my mind that that guy made that happen. I did everything in my power not to have to do that. And that includes applying foresight early on in a prospective confrontation to not get engaged, not get into verbal arguments about parking spots or any of this bullshit in life that it's easy to get your ego engaged with. But our decisions in use of force in self-defense ideally should be egoless, emotionless decision-making because we know what the stakes are. What are the stakes? Dying in the fight, going to prison for the rest of your life. What's worth that? Some things are worth that, but it's probably not a very big list of things.
Everything always seems to come back to the same stuff. Like what do I want? What's my goal? What do I want out of my life for this day? And it's very easy to get wrapped around, like we talk about property rights. Like I just got sent a video the other day. I haven't seen much of it in the news. Somebody from Hawaii sent it to me. I'm not sure if you saw it, but there was some kind of neighbor dispute. And you don't know about this until you read the news article, but there's some outdoor video cameras. It's dusk. A car comes and slams into the house like a couple times. There's a big porch. Then the mom comes out. She's yelling, trying to find the kids and her husband. You can't really tell what's going on. And then you hear a bunch of gunfire. Well, the neighbor came and slammed into their house and then started shooting the house. So dad or husband comes out and fires back, and I believe killed the guy. Well, he's arrested that night, the homeowner, defender, and charged with second-degree murder, I believe. And so this person sent this to me, and I watched the footage, and I'm not a lawyer, right? But I'm like, man, I wonder if there's something else here that we didn't see, or I don't know. Maybe there's something else, or maybe the prosecutors haven't seen yet, and maybe they won't try him or charge him rather, or continue with it. And I think they let him out the next day. So I don't know if they dropped the charges, but maybe they hadn't seen the footage. Maybe the footage, was leaked somewhere from the homeowner to try to get her husband out. I don't know. But people hear or see these things, and it's so unfathomable that, like, I would get arrested when somebody slams their car into my house and starts shooting the house up. Like, should I just like cower in the living room or have like a safe room for my family? How is it that we've gotten to the point where maybe we have this idea of the old West where you just like come out on the yard with your lever action, you better back off, guys, and it's now we can't do that. The family.
I mean, we can never do that, is the truth. But yeah, people are deceived by the movies and novels and The Punisher and John Wick and all this great stuff we all love to watch. It's all great entertainment, but it's not the law, right? So even in that scenario in Hawaii, so someone rams a car into your house, gets out of the car, fires a bunch of rounds into your house. Well, what if they fire all the rounds they have? Their gun's empty, and they drop the gun, and now they're just standing there empty-handed, and you step out of your house and you blow them away with a shotgun. That's not self-defense. You may be killing them because they deserve it, they earned it, they had it coming, all kinds of emotional reasons, but what you were not doing in that moment was defending yourself against an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm, which is what the law requires in order for you to be justified in killing them. Maybe you're mad, justifiably so. Maybe you think they have it coming, justifiably so, but that's not what the law permits. And that's where people get into trouble. Now, of course, we see that kind of stuff in movies all the time, right? Retribution. This is the same kind of people who they'll put like a Punisher backplate on their Glock, and it drives me crazy because the Punisher kills all kinds of people who deserve it, right? In the movie, all kinds of terrible people. But think about who the Punisher is. I mean, he's literally I'll be polite, a graphic novel character who uses force explicitly outside the legal limits of the law. I mean, he's basically a vigilante. Well, in the real world, the law exists, and the law will hold you accountable for having done that. That's not a justified killing, even if you think the person deserved it or had it coming. It's not what the law permits.
So you're saying in our history, I couldn't just shoot somebody that walked in my yard and get away with it?
I've seen cases from the Old West, like the 1880s, where two guys get into a gunfight in the street, and one of them gets shot, injured, drops his gun. He's no longer a threat. The other dude walks up and just shoots him dead on the ground and gets charged and prosecuted and convicted of manslaughter. So even then, it was not permitted to simply kill someone because they had it coming, like you might see in a Western movie.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The culture of how we perceive this stuff definitely changes as well. I think something to like, we often remember things as being better. I don't know if you ever remember reading about the story in Cicero, Illinois. I believe it was around 1950. A black family moves to town. Cicero's just on the edge of Chicago. I've got a friend that's on the police department there. Very white community at the time. Black family moves into an apartment building. They're starting life. They're getting their own place. They're moving in. I believe police chief, Cook County sheriff, fire chief. I believe they were all there, and then a bunch of like firemen. They go in, throw all these people's stuff out the third or fourth floor window, including their piano, smash it on the ground. They burn all their stuff and are like, "Get out of town. You're not welcome here." That's not 1830, in South Carolina. That was Chicago, Illinois, 1950. So like our perception, and nobody got in trouble. Nobody got in trouble. The police chief wasn't put in jail. The sheriff wasn't, pushed out of office and arrested. Nobody got in trouble. I don't know if you ever remember that, but that's an isolated story, but also a pretty common thing. Of course, some crazy racist stuff is not the same as what we're talking about, but I'm just thinking about the ebb and flow of what we perceive to be right and wrong.
Yeah, and when people don't feel like the system is going to keep them safe, right, from unlawful uses of force, they tend to take force into their own hands ultimately. I mean, look at a city like Chicago. Every weekend, dozens of people are shot and killed over drug beefs or territory beefs, or all these people are using force in ways they think are justified. They think that's appropriate for them to kill that other person because that other person did something to them. And they don't feel that the system will adequately address their concerns, which the system probably won't, because probably they're dealing drugs or whatever the case may be. The system's not designed for that. But when people decide that it's in their interest and they have some emotional, maybe even practical from their perspective, business rationale for shooting someone dead, in a chaotic environment, that's what they tend to do. And the more normal people perceive that the criminal justice system is not going to protect them and their family from unlawful harm, the more people feel like, well, what am I going to do? Am I just going to let my family be the victim of predators, or am I going to take fundamentally the law into my own hands? And I understand that. I mean, I would feel much the same way. The only answer is to have a system that alleviates those concerns effectively, so they don't feel like they have to take the law into their own hands. But I don't see us trending that way. I have to confess. I mean, God bless you for the work that you do, and I try to do the best on the legal front, but I don't see America becoming a less violent society in coming years, for sure. So
No.
I would urge people to know how to fight, know how to defend what's yours, know the legal boundaries for that use of force. So again, you minimize the risks of losing the fight to as close to zero as possible, and minimize the risks of spending the rest of your life in prison to as close to zero as possible. It can't be zero, but you can get it pretty darn close.
You offer services. What does that look like?
So we do a few things. We have, of course, our best-selling book, which we give away for free, by the way, lawofselfdefense.com/free book. It's a handbook for how to be hard to convict if you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself, your family, your property. We teach a lot of court.
Hold it up again, but don't move it. It was hard to read when you were moving it.
Oh yeah, well, I didn't want to block my face.
That's okay, but you can get this for free?
For free at lawofselfdefense.com/free book. We do ask you to cover the shipping and handling of getting the book to you, but check it out on Amazon. It's on Amazon, but 5-star reviewed, very popular. But don't buy it on Amazon because they'll charge you for the book. But if you go to lawofselfdefense.com/free book, we'll send the book to you.
It's rad. And then you offer services where basically people have access to you as a self-defense attorney.
So we have a law self-defense membership. We have a platinum membership service, where we provide legal services, legal consulting services to people who've been charged in a use of force event. We used to do that for anybody who would pay us a retainer, but 2 or 3 years ago, we stopped taking outside retainers. We only provide legal services now to our platinum members. So if someone's not a platinum member, we're not available to consult in their case because the demand was too high. It got too crazy. So people can learn more about being a platinum member at lawselfdefense.com/platinum. It's not expensive. It's a few cents a day to be a platinum member. But if you're a platinum member, you get our legal consult for free. So we don't charge you for it. If you were paying a retainer, what we used to do is people would just pay us a retainer. It was a minimum of $10,000 to have us consult on a case. So now it's free if you're a platinum member, and if you're not a platinum member, we just don't provide the consult.
I dig it. And people go to the lawofselfdefense.com.
Yep.
Well, I'll do a shameless plug for you and me now. So I've met Andrew years ago through a mutual organization that we both do work with, which is called CCW Safe. And I used to think this dude was a dick because I'd see him online. Oh, look at me. I'm an attorney. I know everything. You don't know anything. And we hung out, and he's a very jovial guy, and we laughed our butts off, and I've loved him ever since. And so he's come out and supported our S12 event for the last few years. Not only does he come and train and get on the line with the rest of us and run his gun and do all of the exercises, he provides a very valuable lesson at the event where we're going over some of the things that we're talking about in today's podcast. So if you attend an S12 event, you get to hang out with him, ask him questions, sit having dinner and supper and dig into some of these topics at a deeper level. So plug for him and plug for us. That event is November of 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee area. You can visit carrytrainer.com to look that up.
Let me interject a moment. So I've taken lots of training, folks, tons and tons of training in my lifetime. For many years, I was an adjunct instructor at the SIG Arms Academy, for example, SIG Sauer Academy now. And they would let me take whatever courses I wanted to there. It was a great experience, but I've never taken a course that's as amazing as this S12 course. Everything that Mickey covers, and is it 4 days?
Yes, sir.
4 days of the S12, everything from medical stuff, shooting stuff, tourniquet stuff, BJJ stuff. It's amazingly comprehensive, extremely dynamic. It's a fantastic event. So if you've never gone or seriously considered it, I would urge you to take. I don't know if you're already sold out for this year, but if you can get into S12, I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't seriously make the effort.
I appreciate that, brother. That's very kind to hear you say that. And you having said that, I must shed some of the pride of ownership that wouldn't work without Z Durham and Paul Sharp and Rob and Dan. And then we've got a staff of like 10 badass volunteers led by our good buddy, David Sproles. So without all the dudes that are doing that and the gals, it definitely wouldn't exist. So I'm a mere shepherd on the journey with a bunch of foul-mouthed other shepherds. It's fun.
And it's great fun.
Yeah, it is good fun. Parting words, sir.
Well, folks, don't get into fights you don't need to be getting into, but be prepared for the fight that you cannot avoid. Know how to conduct yourself in self-defense to win the physical fight. And I would urge you to learn where the actual legal boundaries are, not just for the legal aspects, but frankly, if you know where those legal boundaries are, you're able to defend yourself in the physical fight more decisively. Don't be this guy in the video. Should I shoot him? Should I shoot him? In the moment when he's facing a dude with a gun and he's got his own gun in his lap, you need to have made that decision long before that moment happens. And the only way to have done that is to know how to run your gun, what the legal rules are for using that gun in a fight. Do that today. Don't wait until you find yourself in the midst of the fight because it's just too late then.
I dig that. I got nothing to add to that. You guys that viewed this, I hope you enjoyed it. Lots of content like this on the internet. That word content's kind of become a weird thing. Everybody's got an opinion. Careful whose opinion you take. This guy's an expert in this field. I would get that book. I would read that book. I would not just consume little 5-minute bits of information on the internet. Nothing that's valuable or going to change your life or save your life is probably coming in 5-minute chunks. Sometimes you actually have to invest in a certain endeavor for weeks or months to develop enough knowledge on it that you can make the decisions he's talking about. So go get that book, read it, share this podcast if you dug it. If you've got some comments and you disagree, if you think that you should just be able to shoot people or just go off based on what your emotions are telling you, I'd like to comment back to you. So go ahead and post that. Or if you just totally disagree with us because you don't like our sweet gray hair and mustaches, you can comment about that. Bye now.
Visit our website, carrytrainer.com, for information about classes held throughout the U.S., Carry Trainer apparel, and upcoming projects. You can also email us at training@carrytrainer.com for information about setting up your own private course or speaking engagement. Training@carrytrainer.com or carrytrainer.com.